Alright, y'all, so today I want to review Fanboys, a film that was released all the way back in 2009 and basically was one of the last pieces of Star Wars related media that came out before Disney acquired Star Wars, so take that as you will. Now, if you've never heard of Fanboys, even as a Star Wars fan, totally understandable. This movie, in a lot of ways, flew under the radar, so to speak. But to kind of give you a general description and synopsis before I go into my pros and cons and my overall thoughts on it, the basic premise is it's 1998, and Star Wars fans are getting super hyped for the prequels, right? It was the first Star Wars movies in years, and of course, as we all know, the fan anticipation and hype for Episode 1 was really unreal. Really, the hype cycle for that movie was truly insane. I never got the chance to live it, but I've seen tons of videos and people talk about it over the years. I mean, it was pretty insane. And a group of friends who happen to be Star Wars fans are eagerly awaiting this movie's release, but one of their friends is dying from cancer. And one of his kind of lifelong dreams, childhood goals, sort of a dying wish, if you will, is the ability to see Episode 1 before it comes out in 1999. Which at the time the movie, at least when this movie takes place chronologically, it takes place in 1998, and he wouldn't be alive by the time the movie gets released of May of 1999. So he wants to get the chance to see the movie before he sadly leaves the earth. So he reunites with some old friends, some current friends, and go on this wild cross-country trip to basically go and break into Skywalker Ranch and see a very rough copy of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And at the end of the movie, Lucas, he doesn't appear in person, but basically grants the one friend who's dying the ability to see the movie. He does so, sadly passes away. And eventually, of course, the movie kind of ends with all the rest of the characters seeing the movie when it premieres in May of 1999, ending with that hilarious joke with one of the friends asking, "What if the movie sucks?" And of course, then the movie ends, which is just perfect way to end a movie in relation to Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. So, to kind of get into my pros and cons, I do think that this movie is pretty interesting. I wanted to give you a little bit my relation to it. I kind of just stumbled upon this movie somewhere. I don't exactly remember if it was Tubi or it was kind of just randomly on TV. Can't exactly tell you which. But I randomly stumbled upon it, and I really enjoyed it at the time. Maybe this is just because, like I said, I'm a pretty big Star Wars fan myself, and I've seen all the movies, so, I'm a pretty big nerd. So maybe, like I said, in a lot of ways, the hype cycle, a lot of their jokes makes sense, right, if you're a Star Wars fan. And in general, it's kind of one of those raunchy comedies from the 2000s that definitely wouldn't be made today. That, I don't know, like I said, this movie is just kind of, in general, a fun time. That being said, it's definitely not without its faults and pros and cons, and it's actually pretty interesting rewatching this movie and actually learning a little bit more about the backstory of this movie. It makes the movie even more fascinating. Basically, the whole idea of this movie actually was crafted, by Ernest Cline, which, if you don't know that name, he did Ready Player One, which, that's a relatively popular book and, of course, a pretty, popular movie to some people, at least to myself. But he came up with the concept. He even made a little short film that sadly is apparently lost media of the movie's concept, this idea that this fans breaking into Lucasfilm to see an early copy of Episode 1. And basically the concept evolved over the years into a fully feature film. And Harvey Weinstein produced it and was planning on distributing it. And apparently, in a lot of ways, like the evil man he was, which eventually we will all find out, thanks to, of course, the whole criminal history that, we found out about, he actually tried to sabotage this movie in a lot of ways. So this movie was actually shown off at Star Wars Celebration. Star Wars fans really liked it. And, Weinstein was apparently going to go all through with it. Then at some point, he kind of changed his mind and said, "Oh, we got to cut out a lot of stuff. We got to redo this." The movie didn't score high enough in his standards. And he tried to change a lot of plot elements of the movie, keep a lot of things. Eventually, there was a fan movement online. I think Star Wars fans online, which we know how toxic Star Wars fans can be, but they kind of nicknamed him Darth Weinstein and basically just tried to fight the movie to save the movie, so to speak. And he eventually kind of caved in and said, you know what, he basically, I think he said something along the lines of, oh, the nerds win. And basically let the director, who at this point had been kind of kicked out of his own movie, to kind of quickly re-edit the movie to something that he likes with some mandates and trepidations. And eventually that's the movie that got released in 2009. I know, like I said, it's not exactly important to this review, but it's a weird and interesting, fascinating story of compromises, reshoots. Apparently there's like an original director's cut and original alternate scenes that's out there somewhere, but also that's a weirdly lost media as well. So I don't know, hashtag restore the fanboy cut. I don't know. That being said, the movie that we did get, I think for the most part, worked out pretty well. I thought it was really funny. Maybe it's just because I have a guilty pleasure for these type of movies. They're just dumb and they're fun. It made me laugh quite a bit. There's some pretty funny Star Wars jokes kind of thrown throughout. And the actors who portray this wild group of Star Wars fans are pretty hilarious, man. I really enjoyed the performances. One of the big pros is I thought that the performances were really good by all the main actors. And I think for the most part, some of the jokes I do feel like are a bit too insensitive. They're a bit too raunchy. And I'll get to some of my cons. But I think the jokes are pretty funny for the most part. I love the fact that there's this kind of made-up rivalry between Star Wars fans and the so-called Trekkies, which I know is a real term for some Star Trek people out there. I'm not exactly sure there's actually a rivalry between the two fan bases. I know there's always been that whole which one is better, but I have a friend who's actually into both franchises, so there's not really, at least to me, I haven't experienced any animosity, but I'm sure there's definitely some people out there that will get defensive when you say, oh, Star Wars is better than Star Trek, which, in my frank opinion, I've always felt that Star Wars is a little bit better, but that's just, like I said, more of a nostalgia bias speaking there. But those scenes are really funny. I like the Trekkie moments. I think it's a running gag throughout the movie that's really funny. I think all the main characters are pretty enjoyable. I like some of the Vegas parts, the wild trip in Texas, the detour was pretty funny. And, you know, the whole thing with one of the characters basically gets, you know, has an online girlfriend, but we find out it's a girl, which, I mean, it was funny. I do think that joke ages more than some of the other jokes in the movie just because it's like there's really creepy intentions. But I do think the way they play it off actually handles it well because his knee, like the girl that the guy was talking to, which is actually like a kid, his niece goes up there and it's kind of a reference to Anti-Cool News, which, I mean, God, remember Anti-Cool News? A lot of crazy stuff there. Basically kicks the crap out of them for talking to his sister, which I'm like, right on, man. That's weird. But that being said, though, there's a lot of really funny moments. I like all the Vegas starts of the stop of the movie stuff. I also like the last part of the movie where they break into Lucasfilm, Skywalker Ranch. Obviously, it's this really exaggerated, version of the place. I'm sure they don't have like THX guys walking around as security guards, even though I wish that was real. All that stuff was really funny and hilarious. I also really surprisingly enjoy a lot of the Star Wars actors that appeared here. I was actually really surprised. Carrie Fisher, she makes an appearance here as one of the doctors treating the friend who got sick and dying of cancer. She's here. She's great. I believe the stuntman who played Darth Maul in Episode 1, which I thought was finally perfect enough, he was in the movie as well, and also Lando, the actor who plays Lando. His actual name, forgive me, is not, I'm not really remembering his name off the top of my head, but Lando, he's in this movie, he makes a cameo as an attorney, and even the guy who plays Machete, not related to Star Wars, appears in the movie. That's really cool stuff. I really enjoy. There's even a Kevin Smith. There's a Jay and Silent Bob gag put into this movie. In a lot of ways, it does feel like a Kevin Smith movie, but like very much Star Wars themed and Star Wars tilted. But yeah, there's a cameo between them two. That's awesome. So yeah, I love those little callbacks to Star Wars and stuff. It's really cool. I like the little car chase with the cop as well. That was pretty funny. I really like the guy. My favorite character in the movie is probably the guy who's like a big Rush fan. He's really funny in the movie. And I also enjoyed some of the writing. Now, I will say there are some problematic areas in terms of that. But I did like the fact that the main character of the movie, who's basically this guy who used to be friends with this group, but kind of separated himself because he has to work a job. He's after high school. We all know how it gets, right? After you graduate high school, you got to at least work a job and provide for yourself. And you kind of lose that creative spark and lose that passion in life. And his passion in life is drawing and doing comics. He kind of lost that, but reuniting with his friends, eventually coming to a decision that he's going to kind of give up his job, so to speak, with his father and go into his passion. And by the end of the movie, he actually has a comic book he made. I mean, like I said, it's not a crazy arc. It's nothing that we haven't seen in movies before. But I mean, I think it's an arc that's relatable, going to, kind of pursuing your dreams, not giving up when life beats you down, and kind of just going into your creative ambitions. It's kind of a relatable thing to all people in life. And even though, like I said, it's kind of an overused arc in a lot of movies, I still think, especially as you grow older, especially, like I said, if you're in your 20s, for example, that's a hugely relatable theme. And I thought it was pretty interesting. I thought that it was really interesting. It was a good and decent arc. Also, I wanted to quickly mention for performances, Seth Rogen's in this movie. He's hilarious. He plays like multiple characters. Like he kind of plays a pimp in one, and then he plays like a Trekkie. Hilarious stuff. Hilarious stuff. And the fact that Seth Rogen's a Trekkie is hilarious. But yeah, I thought, like I said, the actors, the performances, the story, the fun moments for the most part were really fun. And this movie in general was just a really fun time. And as a Star Wars fan, it was a really nice little treat. That being said, I'm going to get into some of my cons because I definitely think this movie could have been better than it was. I still think it's really enjoyable, but it could have been a bit better. For example, in the story, there are some hilarious moments with Trekkies and Star Wars fans that I really enjoyed. I do think that the movie missed a little bit of an opportunity to maybe explore more of the hype behind Episode 1. Like, I don't know. Maybe, like I said, that when this movie took place, late 1998, it was a bit too early for a lot of stuff. But I know, like, one of the key moments of the Episode 1 hype was the fact that when the teaser trailer premiered in, I think, one of the movies in 1998, if I'm not mistaken, it boosted that movie's box office to a pretty big degree, and Star Wars fans would just go to a theater, watch the teaser, and then leave. There could have been a moment like that in this movie. Just more things, more moments that could have maybe explored and expanded upon the Episode 1 hype cycle. Weirdly enough, I think there could have been a really funny gag, too, where they maybe could have gotten like a Jar Jar Binks tongue lollipop toy, because that kind of fits this movie's raunchy vibe. Obviously, I'm not sure if it would have been too early for that, but that would have been a hilarious little gag as well. So yeah, more events like that would have helped. I did like the nerdy guy's sort of arc and him basically finding out that he really loves this girl that he's been working with the entire time. That's decent. I just think it could have been explored more and developed more. And maybe the pedophile thing, like I mentioned earlier, wasn't as bad as, like I said, the niece comes and beats him up. But I think that could have been cut out the movie. I don't know. It would have been funnier. Maybe he was just some grown man. And I've been like, okay, that would have been funnier. But him actually talking to a kid was a little bit weird. Maybe I'm just being a little insensitive to it. I don't know. And there's this one part of the movie where they're kind of in this weird gay biker club. And that part of the movie was a little bit uncomfortable. I feel like it was like, you're being a bit too raunchy. You're maybe saying some things about gay people that are not too nice. Which apparently that was also one of the weird Weinstein mandates that scene had to be in the movie. That part of the movie, I was like, it kind of kind of dips down in quality a bit. It becomes a bit too raunchy. But other than that, besides those scenes, maybe a bit more Star Wars stuff and a little bit more development in some of the arcs of the characters. Beyond that, I think this is a pretty fun and solid movie. It's not great. It has a lot of problems, obviously. But I think for the most part, it's a fun and enjoyable ride. It's a fun and decent premise. I think they executed it pretty well. It's kind of a turn your brain off. And if you like Star Wars, enjoy the ride, so to speak. Just like I said, I think this movie could have been a little bit better than it actually is. But like I said, I do recommend it. If you're into Star Wars, which I know a lot of people are, I do recommend this movie. It's kind of a fun little comedic ride. It's a very raunchy 2000s comedy. If you like those type of comedies, then this is definitely right up your lane. It has some really also decently heartwarming moments as well. And obviously some really funny parts as well that I also really enjoy. And I just, in general, laughed a lot in this movie and had a fun time. So I'll definitely recommend it. I think this is kind of one of those movies where, like, if you have a group of friends that's totally into Star Wars and it's like a Friday night and you want to kick back and you play Fanboys, I think they'll totally laugh and enjoy it. It's kind of like one of those movies, right? It's an enjoyable movie, but it's not like so, crazy good in terms of quality, right? But yeah, that's my thoughts on Fanboys from 2009. Pretty solid Star Wars movie. Hope you all have a good day, and peace, y'all.